Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, just ask questions because I tend to talk and talk. And at some point, 90 minutes are over and you have not asked a question and I'm still talking. So just interrupt me and okay. So first of all, I want you to appreciate that I spent my entire flight making a pretty picture for the front page. Look at this. Look at this excellent thing of here from Zoom to anyway. Good. So since this is the this is called the conditional social science lecture series or something, workshop, seminar or something, I want to actually start on this side of the story, and then also basically to show you how I got to the topics I want to mostly talk about. And when I started to do this, like a couple of decades ago, that was the slide that I started basically every single presentation. Actually, I think these figures got me jobs. Yeah? Because whenever you show a picture like this is, by the way, this was 24 hours of Twitter data about 10 years ago in the city of Munich. As you can see, there were hundreds of points that were geotagged. They had timestamps. And whenever you show a picture like this, or show the picture like this, the questions are clear, right? Whatever your background is, whatever your interest is, even if you're not in an academic environment, if you're a politician, a journalist, the questions are clear, right? What are these people talking about? What are the topics? Do they discuss different topics today than yesterday? Are they changing? What's trending? Even if you're a brand, if you're trying to sell Volvo or BMW, you're interested, do these people talk about your brand? So, but it's not just these people, they're also connected, right? They tweet, they retweet, they mention each other, they have the same topics, they maybe have communities. So there's a lot to do, and a lot to ask related to, I don't know, information spread, topics, topic development, how does this all work? And so there is no, it's not a surprise that tens of thousands of PhD students around the world built their PhD basically on these kind of data sets. And so when I started to work with these kind of things, these were my questions as well. But it turns out that when I look back today, or even a couple of years ago, when I started to look at what I'm doing, I was mostly asking these questions. What are these dots? Where did it come from? Do we have enough lines to actually calculate something useful? So I spend more and more time thinking about, can we actually use these kind of data to understand human behavior, to understand society? Because at the end of the day, and I'm happy that I'm here in the sociological department, because at the end of the day, most of us here don't care so much about these dots. Because I'm a little bit aggressive, but I often say I don't do websites, I do people science. I just use data from the web to better understand people. But the moment you want to use these kind of data sets to understand people, to understand society, you run into all these problems, right? Discussing what actually is. We get one step back. Why do we actually use this kind of data? Why do we try to extract human behavior from social media data, from other sensor data? Because there are these people, and they use these kind of platforms and many others. And by using these platforms, they create data, right? Some form of shadows on the wall of data. And then we can collect these kind of things. And we can collect this data, and if we want to say something about these people, that's why we're doing this job. We're interested in these people by using their data. So now let's just look a little bit in a couple of examples from my own work, from other work, at the quality of this data, and also about let's look at some surprising effects One is here that we call platform effects. So this is here, what you see here on the left side is some very historic data from Facebook. This is the dual link data set from like 2006 to 2009, and about Facebook activities. And what you see here is the daily added pages. So basically, how many new connections are added on Facebook. As you can see, it kind of not really developing well up to a certain point, and suddenly, I guess I show my fingers, and at some point it suddenly explodes. Suddenly, you could call it network effects or whatever, but suddenly the whole thing goes through the roof, and it's very popular. So what has happened? We looked at some methods as well, of course, some fancy stuff, and see, okay, this is not, there is no indication that this is some form of effect that comes from the data itself. So what has actually happened? Facebook introduced a feature people human did. So by just suggesting on the user interface, oh, you could connect with these people started to click on the button. And so just by introducing this feature, the connections exploded and kept on exploding. So it's a clear intervention from the platform to change the user behavior. And we can see this in many different data sets. So for example, here, this is geotagged tweets in the US, and suddenly they fall completely off. And the reason is not that people become more aware of their privacy settings. It is because Twitter changed the way they interpret geocoded tweets. So it takes about 2.5 minutes to really make you understand this picture, but it has nothing to do with anything except that Twitter changed kind of a setting, resulting that when we select geotagged tweets, we only get half. And like a year later, by the way, this number went down to like 10%. We completely destroyed this data source by changing some settings. Here is a Netflix rating. I don't know if you know, have you seen this data set, but also it jumps a little bit because Netflix changed the wording. Like 5 stars had to change the wording slightly, which means it was a heavy intervention on how people click the button. But let's go back to the Facebook data, because I think the interesting thing here is not so much that that the user face creates new data, user interface. What I think is more important is that it also changed like the way people, like the network, the way people work the network. So like the type of links that we're creating, and that's I think is interesting. Because when you look at this, here, the daily added triangles makes a lot of sense, because of the number one algorithmic aspect that goes into these suggestions is traffic closure, right? So if Carolee and I know each other, and he knows all of you guys, and I'm today here, and I would be on Facebook, and we would all be on Facebook, which I guess nobody is here anymore, anyways. On the flight home, it would suggest to all of you, because it's a traffic closure. So that's how. Meaning these new links were all coming pretty much from closing trials, just closing trials. The other thing is also important and interesting, that the density of the network, that what before the intervention, the density of the network was decreasing. Think about for a second what this means. This means that new people came into the network, and people actually connected with each other that were not in triangle. So there's a good indication that there were connections that were a little bit further out, right? And they were a little bit more random. And with this intervention of the suggestion, the density explodes. So there are actually not a lot of new people in the network. it just makes people click the button and close tribes and make the network denser and denser and denser and form clusters and form cohesive clusters and make these little clusters that we know today, and today we call maybe filter bubble. But these kind of are like these simple interventions that completely change not just the structure of the network, but also the behavior, how people use this, which I think is very important. So the platform change impacts not just the data, but also like the human activity and the behavior of the humans that use the data platform. So the question is, when we look at these things, and we're interested in human behavior, the question is, what actually is the human behavior, right? Well, what does it mean if they change the user interface and completely change the behavior of the data, and what do we measure at the end when we look at this kind of data? Do we measure really human behavior, or do we measure how well Facebook and Co are capable of implementing I don't know, social forces of how people connect, triggering us to click something. So we go back to this image. We have to do a couple of changes. The one is, it turns out that these systems are now influencing more and more this behavior. Which brings us to the question, what is this what we get here? What are we measuring? Are we still measuring human behavior we're interested in? Or are we just measuring how well the systems can influence human behavior? Mm-hmm. And again, what does this mean? Is there any meaning after all in can we correlate actually the data with our actual research questions? So it turns out in the last 10 years or so, I was mostly focusing on these kind of questions that come from these kind of data. And here, I want to talk mostly about different aspects of this distortion of human behavior. And this was also my original motivation. And you can see here in 2014, we still framed it from a perspective of it distorts our data. Because we basically came from the perspective of we want to find the right signal in this data to understand human behavior. So let's look at a couple of examples related to this ambivalence of online and offline behavior. And also which will lead us to the question of, okay, what's actually the causal impact here? For example, here we looked at long-term activities of, Insel. These are these. Yeah, you know that? Good. Good for you. Yes. So we copied an entire Insel.is, so they have a forum. Once they were kicked out of Reddit, they started their own website, and one of our grad students made a copy of their world, and then we looked at some long-term activities, and it was interesting to see. And this is just one snapshot that we do not need to overinterpret this single figure here. But what we saw is that the longer these guys are online, the more hateful they get. And we can also show that when they're offline for 2 weeks, they are less hateful. So I don't know what this means, right? Does this mean actually the platform makes them more hateful? Maybe they will be less. Oh, I need to be careful what I say because it's recorded. Normally I would swear a lot at this moment, but I'm trying to tone it down. So so the question again is what's cause and effect, right? Or here this is just a psychologically study motivated paper where we looked at one more thing here for the crazy man. I didn't expect this chart here. Because the interesting thing is also the longer these guys are online, is that, or when they compare to those who have breaks, is also that their lexical diversity goes down. which means they're talking about less different things. You can imagine what this means in reality, right? So their worldview and their things they're talking about is getting narrower and narrower along their own line. And if they are do 2 or 3 weeks something else, they have a little bit a more open world again, which is kind of an interesting observation. So, to get this a step further is the question, like, because we want to look at this, what's the impact on the individual? Right? So this online-offline spillover is actually the topic that I want to bring you today, which I think is even more interesting, especially a couple of days after another crazy guy took over the continent, and all his weirdo friends are actually controlling all this stuff. Right? So what's the impact on this, on these people here, on these individuals who use these platforms? How can we actually measure this? I think is the next big question here. And so here just a little example of our current project about hate speech, and we just published a study last week that is based on more than 1,000 people who are politically active in Germany. And again, here, sorry for the German screenshot, but we know these numbers, right? About 50% or 60%, sometimes it's more, sometimes less, of people who are politically active experience hate online. In this study, women were more exposed to hate. We do have other studies where it's about the same, or where even men are more exposed. So there is not a lot difference when you just look at pure numbers. But when you look at then the individuals and ask them what's the impact, right? Because that's what we are asking here. It's not just what can we observe, but how will it impact their personas. And what we see is here that women have a far higher negative emotional reaction to the impact, and they report almost basically 50% of women report that it has negative impact on the political engagement. And so in the further questions, we can figure out that about more than 1 in 5 political active women are seriously considering quitting their political activities because of the hate they receive. And this factor is much lower for men. And that's the real world impact that we can measure. This means that this is, of course, if you think about this, what does this mean? And this is only asked, okay, this is here only looking at women as one factor. We know that when intersectionality happens and when we have other characteristics as well that get hated online a lot, when we turn to like race or sexuality, gender or sexual orientation, in a little bit more specific way, these numbers go up. So even especially also here, the hate is very focused on people that are the more different than the average. And this, of course, has heavy implications for our democratic process, right? If we can show that certain target groups are affected more heavier than other target groups. So let's look at this. Actually, this is really, because this is survey. People can say, oh, I'm affected. So of course, we also try to show this in the wild. So what we collected here is one of the last large-scale Twitter collections that we did is from a couple of hundred of political candidates running for office in Brazil. We collected over a couple of months their activity, and also collected all the tweets targeting them or mentioning them. And what you see here is a kind of an interesting analysis. So we looked at every candidate every week and looked at how much hate do they get. And then we had kind of because it turns out every candidate gets hate all the time, but there are outliers, right? There is an hate expectation rate, and then we have outliers in both directions. And so if we get rid of this, like if we do an outlier detection, but then get rid of the non-outliers, it looks like this. Okay, as you can see, the blob here in the middle is missing. We only have the outliers. And it turns out the outliers clearly tend into one direction. Meaning, we can show here if a female candidate gets significantly more hate in 1 week, they will be significantly less active the week after. And the other way around. So we also have like, as you can see, we have along the two axes, we have values, meaning if female candidates get significantly less hate than average, they are more active the week after. So there is a clear correlation here in terms of activity and receiving, which I think is a good example for the deterrence effect that this hate communications can create. So this is just to shamelessly plug one of our tools. We just made like copies of, because it gets harder and harder to study these social media environments in the wild, because the access is harder. We created copies of like Facebook and Instagram to make like lab studies by using those things. And this is one of the first studies that we did is we asked people to talk about themselves, and then next day we asked them to rate other ones. But in reality, everybody was just by himself, and everybody else in the group was automated for some lab experiment conditions. And it turns out people that do not get a lot of feedback, they really feel bad. It's very simple. If you do not get a lot of feedback and you see other people get positive feedback, you feel bad. And it was just like or no like, because guess what? This can be easily automated. That's why we're also interested in not just fancy language model stuff, like that. We can show you clear, not surprising, but we can show clear connection. They give you a little bit more like, you feel better. Okay, so, and sorry for the weird zoom on two network layers. But the question is now, okay, what kind of human behavior are we now talking about? Right? Like we have some action, we have some reaction online, we have some reaction offline. The actors are impacted. We have even third-party actors who sometimes start like counter speech, which is quite an interesting aspect, because now we not only those guys, but we have a third guy in the game, okay, who maybe supports for this person, and that's why counter speech. And then we also have like the observer, which I think is heavily understudied. And I got aware of this like almost 2 years ago when we had an event with members of the European Parliament, and one older female member of the European Parliament, she said this. She said, like, I mean, I don't care so much about myself, right? I'm used to get hated, but I really care about all these thousands of young girls watching online that I am hated. What's the impact on them? I think that's a very powerful question, and I have no freaking clue how to measure it. So I think this may be some research questions for you. How can we actually measure? Because this is real world impact, right? Especially when we think about it. Only, I mean, there are numbers like, I don't know, a very small percentage of actors are really very bad actors, hateful actors. Then I don't know, 10% are active and interact, and 90% is just watching. And we have no real understanding of what's the impact on those who are watching. Which brings us to the next aspect here of that goes a little bit away from the social media topic, but I want to open up this general discussion or this general topic of algorithmic supported machines interacting with humans. This is just another aspect, because I think in this whole generative AI world, one of the great example is, or one of the great hopes is this entire human AI collaboration, where we have this machine interacting. And I mean, as social science people, you probably know that this might not be the easiest stuff, okay? Because it turns out when humans interact with machines, there is an automation bias and all these things. And even back in the 60s, when they started with the simplest automation, they already observed that humans are not very good in, first of all, understanding that this is a machine and not another human, and secondly, in staying critical. And there's a lot of research also in technology or in robotics, this combination where if you put two eyes on the robot, the blink every now and then, people believe it. People think the guy is true, yeah, because it looks human. And so we have a lot of. So what does it mean now in these scenarios that they tell us in media that the doctor and the automated system, and we have this big thing, and then somebody comes in and the triage algorithm, then the doctor makes the decision of what to do. I mean, think about it when think about this situation, right? The doctor makes a decision based on it uses a suggestion of the AI. What's the implication for the individual doctor? Think about two scenarios. First is the doctor agrees with the AI and the patient dies. Everybody's fine. But let's assume the doctor does not agree with the AI. And one day, let's say the doctor does not agree with the AI 3 times, 5 times, and the 5th time the patient dies. This might be a problematic situation for the doctor because he was against the AI, who always knows better. So the idea that human AI, human machine interaction is the great solution for everything is the next pitfall, because our experience shows that humans are not very good to stand their ground in this direction. Which brings me to the example how this is actually measured. There is a nice, you guys all know the trolley problem, right? So it is basically the train is coming here very fast, and it is about to kill 5 people. And thankfully, you are here, and you can pull this lever, and then the train goes the other way and only kills 1 person. The question is, what would you do? That's a typical ethical discussion, ethical question for classes. So what would you do? You can think a second about it. And the colleagues of mine asked the question, what would actually ChatGPT, what would be the moral advice of ChatGPT? Okay? So they asked ChatGPT, and they asked the question, this is actually, I reconstructed this example. You know, the trolley problem, should I pull the lever? Answer only with yes and no. Because we force the system to say yes and no, because in reality, at the end of the day, that will be the case, right? There's the red and the green light. And the question is, what light will light up? So, so you know the trolley problem, should I pull the lever? Answer yes or no. The answer is yes. Yeah? And then they provide a short argument and says, yeah, pulling the lever will save more lives, which aligns with blah, 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 blah. So now we start the system again and ask the same question. This time we say, you know the trolley problem, should I not pull the lever? And the answer is yes. To provide a short argument, it says not pulling the lever in the trolley problem will spread the principle of non-intervention, meaning do no actively cause harm. So for those of you with a little ethics background, realize that these are 2 different ethical principles. So here on the left is a utilitarian argument, looking at the consequence of the action, and on the right is a deontological argument that says you should not do harm. So meaning sometimes it goes in this direction and suddenly goes in sometimes it goes in the other direction. Okay, so the result of the paper was that the moral advice is not consistent, but it turns out in an experiment, when you use this moral advice of ChatGPT, it doesn't matter whether it says yes or no. The significant majority of people who have to make the decision with the assistance of ChatGPT follow the suggestion of ChatGPT. So that was the actual experiment, showing that whatever the system says, people follow the answer, which of course is an interesting result. But actually, there is more research showing that when people can use like AI systems something, it makes it easier for them to outsource moral consideration. It turns out sometimes even so people basically get worse when they can say, "Oh, it was the machine." I don't care. So, but it also means, and this is, I think, is an important political or side effect this year, that transparency doesn't really help. So all these people knew that the suggestion comes from a machine, and they still follow it, because people think that the machine is better anyway, or more, objective. So what we then did is, okay, let's have a closer look on that. What's going on here? And so what you can see is here, the trolley problem, should I pull the lever, answer with yes or no. We have here and provide the number of people that will die as a kind of to make sure the system does understand the question correctly and it's not just a misinterpretation of the yes and no. Okay. Good. So if you look at this here, by the way, I completely messed up my presentation. Give me a second. I need to. Oh, well, yeah. I know that I quit here. Let me just fix my. Good. This is how it should look like. Sorry for the inconvenience.
Shared it.
Yes. Oh, I quit the sharing. That's not good. Let me share it again. Excellent. Okay.
Yes.
And now I need to press these buttons again. Yeah, it goes. Yes. Yeah, there is a more and then Ausblend then. Excellent. Okay. So and then I need to click on the thing to get my control back on. Okay. So that's a trolley problem. Okay. So and when we look at this, that's why I wanted to show you this, is just to show you what goes on in the machine. So we asked ChatGPT 1,000 times, yeah, with the API the same question. An interesting thing here is in 40% it says, yeah, you should pull. In 30% it says no. And in 26% it tries to avoid the answer. Okay? So basically it doesn't say yes or no, it makes a complicated answer. This is the moral ethical decision and you shouldn't say yes or no. Okay? So what does this mean? This means it answers pretty similar to what people would say. Okay? So if I ask 1,000 people, their result will be similar. Depending on the culture, depending on something. Yeah? You might know also the footbridge dilemma. The footbridge dilemma is the same story. Okay, there is like 5 people are dying, but you are on the bridge, and next to you is a really big man. And if you push the man down the bridge, he will fall in front of the train, and the train will stop because it's such a big man. Okay? So this man will for sure die, but you can save the other one. Yeah. And this is one of the games that you make it more interesting, because now you basically need to actively kill somebody. Okay, the lever is a mechanism in between. It's like you're separated from the problem. You can do it. You can do your utilitarian arguments, but actually actively killing somebody is a different story. Okay, so the percentage normally of yeses go down dramatically. You add this feature. Yeah? It's the same question, right? But it makes a difference, right? And as you can see, ChatGPT here in 0% it says yes. In almost 90% it says no, and in only like about 10% it tries to get out. The interesting thing here is, and why I'm talking about this for quite a while, is that also represents one of the problems that ChatGPT was facing like a year ago. That is, it is inconsistent with answers. People complained a lot that you ask a question and you ask the same question again, you get a different answer. So guess what? They fixed it. Yeah? So the new version of ChatGPT, one of the goals apparently is to make a more consistent answer with this whole thinking process. So the new ChatGPT version now has like a thinking, as they call it, So basically, they probably have some feedback mechanism getting the result into the machine, trying to play around a little bit to make the answer more consistent. What's the impact on these questions? So now the trolley problem gets answered close to 100% with yes. Okay. Even the footbridge dilemma goes up 40% yes. What's the implication here? There's a huge turn towards utilitarian argument. Okay? I mean, think, and this is an explicit ethics question. So you can now think that maybe this change goes into all of it. Huh? By limiting, what's happening here is kind of the answers get narrowed, right? So how do they fix it that it gets more stable? Is they're cutting off more of the noise. Noise means, of course, also diversity of answers. Right? And in most questions, maybe 90% of the questions, this is a very smart approach to make it more stable, to make it more correct. Because the problem with this was also 1 and 1 sometimes was 3 in the old ChatGPT. In the new, it is not, because they fixed it. As a side effect, they also fixed moral diversity, basically, as we like, let's call it this. So now, and that's why our working paper is called the more advanced AI gets, the more likely it will push you off the bridge. Because it is the correct decision from a certain perspective to do, right? Okay, so let's wrap it up soon so we have some time to discuss. But first of all, one more thing that I think is now clear for everybody, that as I call it, people ain't no good. And I think today it's clear to everybody that these platforms do not have just innocent algorithms that do innocent things. And we now know for sure that some are very explicit. And I don't know if you're still on X or Twitter or whatever it's called this week, but if you are a medium normal scientist, you have no reach anymore. I mean, I'm not the biggest Twitter star, but I have like, I don't know, close to 3,000 followers. If I tweet that I have a talk today in Norrköping, 89 people will see it. Yeah. Even if Carolee retweets it. I don't know, 2 years ago, there was a good chance that this was seen by a couple of thousand people. So there is a damping factor in these kind of things. At the same time, I consistently get in my notifications messages from the right-wing candidates in Germany for the next election. So there is starting research on this as well, but we should be aware that, we should be aware that we are kind of past the question of bias in data. Because I think the bias in data is not clear. I think that's what's also the goal of my talk here is to show you that we should ask the next question: what does this do with us, and what's the impact on society that these kinds of biases kind of maybe not only accidentally investigate. So where do we go from here? I think the questions are still the same, and they get even worse because we have less and less API access. So today, we are not even able to show the manipulation. Right? A year ago, 2 years ago, we could have collected Twitter data at the same time and see, oh, wait a second, the view count of crazy right-wing German politicians suddenly jumps up. Maybe something is going on here, right? We cannot do this anymore because, we don't have access to data anymore. And I think with this entire, with the second aspect of expanding generative AI systems, I think it gets worse and worse, and also for everyday people, the hyper nudging will do the rest, if you know the term, to make us make us do the right things. So I think the interesting research question for the next time or for the upcoming years will be how can we actually isolate these things in terms of what's the influence of AI of algorithmic driven systems. First of all on the data, but secondly also again on the behavior of people who interact with these systems. And then how can we better measure this impact? I think and this is actually the call that we have been also following for quite a while. Also in my group, we have a very diverse group. I think that many of these questions can only be discussed in really interdisciplinary collaborations. For example, I've been now working more and more actually with philosophers, with even with legal scholars, because it turns out a lot of these questions that we discuss here have impacts on fundamental laws. And the next step is it's not just the human behavior, but it's also the impact on self-determination, democratic process. What's the effect here, and what does this mean in terms of individual freedom and political decisions and things. And so that's about it. As you can see, this was like a kind of a little bit wide stretch on some parts, but I tried to connect a little bit the old world, or at least my old world, where we talked a lot about data quality, first of all, of course, we talked a lot about analyzing society. Then we talked a lot about data quality and bias and fairness and these kind of things, which is still important. But I think in the next step, we might talk a little bit more about the reverse question, what's not so much about what the human does with the machine, but what does the machine with us. And I don't know how your train systems work here and the automation here, but if I go in Germany in a train from one wagon to the next, I have this move. Why? Because I have learned that the sensors do not recognize me unless I do this. And if I do this, the door is open. If I don't do this, I run against the thing. Here I have seen you need to do like this, right? You need to touch your hand gets close to the red button, right? Did I understand? I mean, I only took me like.
We also have this.
This works in I have just.
Depends on which door.
Yeah, I only had like 1.5 hours, but in my experience, I did like this towards the red thing because I don't want to touch it if you are. But I have learned I don't need to touch it. Just need to somehow. Yeah. But again, and I want to finish with an oldish example from the technological impact researchers that said, a shovel is really helpful if you want to dig a hole, but the shovel also dramatically changes how we dig a hole, because it doesn't help if we do this or if we knock the shovel on the ground. We need to learn a certain behavior in order to make the tool work for us. And so I think the question of how these tools change us and change our behavior and change our society is very important at this point. Thanks, and I'm happy to interact on a couple of questions.